Hello, everybody. Sorry. Welcome to the last session. Woo! For those of you who didn't see me yesterday, we're going to be talking today about scaling tricks and tips. And for some reason, my laptop keeps shutting off. He's hoping it holds up. All right, so if you didn't see me yesterday, my name's Renee. If you can tell from the accent, I'm from Australia. This is not good. So I run a podcast. You're welcome to listen to it. It's called The Agile Revolution. I have a company in Australia called Unbound DNA. It's a consulting company. You can follow me on Twitter, Agile Renee, not that hard. And I have a blog called Agile Forest. I am also a coach inside of Australia. I do a lot of banking-based transformations. So I've worked in around about 3 of the major 4 banks in Australia. Mostly mobile bank products than anything else that I do a lot of work with. And mostly huge teams. So when I'm talking about huge teams, generally around about 16 teams is what I work with inside of the banking platforms. So what you're going to be hearing today are all the special little things that you won't ever see on a safe website, on a less website, on a scale website somewhere. Cool. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and do a bit of a walk back in time in the Agile timeline. This is my sort of take on the different generations of Agile. I actually think to date, we've experienced 3 generations of Agile. So welcome on board. You can now start on generation 3. Congratulations. Stage 1 started many decades ago, back when we did, Scrum was first introduced in 1995, all the way up till 2001, when the Agile Manifesto was defined. This is what I called defined Agile. Stage 2, second generation Agile. This is when we spent an awful lot of time as practitioners. Okay, you'll sort it out. Awful lot of time as practitioners trying to look at what works better. It's taking those new Agile processes, things like Scrum, XP and so forth, and sort of playing around with them, tailoring them. For those of you who aren't familiar, when Scrum was first introduced, its sprint length was mandated at 4 weeks. It's no longer the case anymore because through experiments we learnt what was working better. Interestingly, also at the end of the second generation, a whole pile of new frameworks started coming in, things like Scrum, Kanban and Lean Startup. And these were frameworks that were introduced because there was a problem as we were implementing XP and Scrum that it wasn't working in an operational environment. And so we were trying to address some of the problems that we were seeing through introducing new frameworks. And then we got third generation of Agile. In first and second generation, we were predominantly looking at how we could do Agile in a team. Third generation of Agile was focused around how we could do Agile across many teams. So when you hear the term scaled Agile, it now means I'm doing Agile, but there's multiple teams that are contributing to the same product, that are contributing to the same outcome. Let's say you're scaling if you're talking about 3 teams, 30 plus people, and you're scaling all the way up to a tribe or a village of up to 150 people. And you can even go beyond that in some of these scaling frameworks. We can actually go up to around about 70 or 100 teams maximum using these frameworks. But whilst I just mentioned a few of those approaches, this is actually what the roadmap really looks like. Through around about 2 decades of implementing Agile, we have discovered many different ways of working. If you go to different conferences, there's all sorts of different things that you'll hear about Agile. There's techniques that are both developer-centric, scale-centric. There's a whole pile of management techniques. So there was a few mentions yesterday about holacracy as an example. It worked perfectly yesterday. Yeah. So in addition to those, this family of agile approaches, where are we going next? What's next? Does anyone have any ideas whilst I'm waiting for the actual picture? What do you think's next, anyone? Outside of IT, yeah. It's already being done quite a lot, which is good. That's a good stance, yep. Outside of... Oh, they rebooted. Any other ideas? So we talked about the refined element. So when you did Agile just in a single team, it went through an era of refining. I think there's a stage that we're coming up to where we're actually going to be spending an awful lot of time refining how we're doing scale as well. So a lot of what I'm going to bring you today is some of those things that we've already learnt that actually aren't in any of those frameworks. They aren't in things like SAFe, in LESS, and DAD, Nexus, SCRUM Inc. at scale. I missed one. Can't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry? What do you want to do? Let's just kill it. Let's redo it. All right. So, fourth generation is, it could be business agility. So to your point around operations and outside of IT, it could be focusing on wider, all the way through finance, management, operations. But it also could be something like this, delighting customers. How many agile frameworks have you seen incorporate design thinking or customer-centered design? None.
Not safe.
How many people are incorporating design thinking right now? They're doing it in parallel to Agile. So I sort of think as we're refining, we're probably going to move into one of these two stages, maybe even both at the same time, where we're actually refining scaled and at the same time incorporating design thinking and customer centricity into the problem. And probably at the same time going broader into the enterprise in itself. So we're not talking about this. This is Scrum. I'm not talking about Scrum today, okay? I'm going to assume that you may know something about this. I'm going to sort of talk about the concepts beyond this. I'm going to talk something more like this, where Scrum is done at scale, where you have multiple teams working in parallel, and then at a larger sort of concept, they're going back up and pulling at a macro level into, in this example, this is a SAFe representation. That's not the SAFe picture that everyone else puts up, is my drawing of it. But it's a very simple perspective of SAFe, where you're just regularly going back to something like PI planning every 6 sprints or 6 iterations, and then you're going through those constant loops. So I'm going to give you 6 or 7 patterns, some tips that you would never have heard of. One is the MITOSIS pattern, and this has got actually nothing to do with doing Agile. If you go from a situation where you have, for example, I went through a situation of 2 teams and I had to scale to 16 teams in the space of 6 months. How do you do that? And this is the pattern that I applied. It's the MITOSIS pattern. We had 2 teams. We grew those 2 teams up so that they had 14 people each. Then we split those 2 teams into two so that there was 4 teams of 7. We grew those teams up until they were 14 again. Split them into 2. Continue that pattern constantly. And so this is a great technique for actually increasing the number of teams, and the advantages of doing such is that you actually get to have your cultural norms being persistent as you're doing this. So how you work is relayed through that story and that narrative of being inside of that team. There's many other pros, but I would actually like to highlight the cons. So it's not all about all the benefits. I'm going to give you some bad things about some of these patterns as well. So teams are constantly going through change. So Tuckman's model talks about the whole forming, norming, storming, performing. If you're constantly adding team members, which you would be in this pattern, you're constantly going through Tuckman's model, which means you're never going to reach performing until you're done. But you've got the risk anyway, no matter which approach you take. So that was the simplest pattern, MITOSIS. This is interesting. So I actually have used this quite a bit, and I've actually validated with a number of organisations across the world that they also magically come to the same pattern. I call it the leadership cell pattern. It was interestingly somewhat similar to a slide that Shane showed yesterday. So this pattern in my mind is this theory that when you've got multiple teams, you need something at the top across them to have cohesiveness, to have alignment. And I sort of think of these key focus areas. I didn't call them roles. And the reason why is that if you only have 3 teams, then you might have one person doing multiple of these. If you have more than 10 teams, I can pretty much guarantee you'll probably have a different person each one of these focus areas. So firstly, you've got someone who's focused on customer experience. That is their responsibility and their accountability. You've got someone at a leadership level who's focused around the business side. So business revenue, business optimization, business process. You've got someone who's focused on adoption. Well, normally adoption and business can be together, but in a lot of the situations that I work in, because we go out to around about 2,000 different users, many different customer bases, branches, call centres and so forth, we actually have someone who's dedicated to make sure that the change as it's rolled out is successful. And really importantly, that the benefits are realised at the end of the day. We've got someone who represents the focus around technology, the architecture of the system, the technical debt that's within the system. And we've got someone who's focused around delivery. And they're managing the time, the cost. And then this dotted line here is a coach. So it's a dotted line because a coach may not always be there. In fact, they shouldn't be there longer term. But importantly, the reason why I put them into this pattern is that they're seen as a peer to this group of people. Often these people don't see a coach as a peer, they see them as a subordinate. And I felt it was important to lift them up to the same level that they were at. Has anyone ever heard of the DVF framework? I knew no one would have heard of it. Okay, so this is really big in Australia at the moment. If you want to understand some of the concepts around prioritisation and getting work ready, we're using a lot of this DVF framework, which means desirability, viability, feasibility. And it's looking to shape work as it comes down the pipeline before it gets to the teams. Is this the right work that we're going to be working on? And the whole focus of this is build the right thing. Not just build the thing right, build the right thing. So that we're not spending all this money building the wrong thing out to the market. And so the way that the DVF framework is quite simple. Desirability. Is there a customer that wants this? Is it a customer need? Viability. Will we get a return of investment on this? Is it operationally achievable? Can we roll it out successfully? And feasibility. Is it technically achievable? Is it aligned to our roadmaps of where we want to go technically? Do we even have the right capability to deliver this? And then lastly, looking at all these 3 lenses together as one to say, is this the right thing that we should be focusing on? And so we use this as a mechanism to actually score it in a similar way that we do story points for user stories. We do it relatively. We give it a value for D, we give it a value for V, we give it a value for F. We sort of think about the time that's associated with it, so doing weighted shortest job first on top of that. And then we can actually compare big chunky pieces of work against each other to say, what's the most important thing that we can be working on? And I bring this up because, interestingly, it aligns with the leadership cell from an accountability perspective. The customer experience focused is focused around customer outcomes. Business is focused on return of investment. Adoption around whether it's operationally achievable. Technology around the alignment, and then delivery around the capability, and then actually doing the narrative about adding them all up together. So this is going to be slightly controversial, and interestingly, again, referring to Shane's talk yesterday, he talked about failed product ownership. I'm actually a big advocate on I don't know whether it's no product owner or everyone's a product owner concept. I'm not quite sure which way to take it. But I've actually seen this play out really effectively, whereby whoever's leading design has their own backlog. Whoever's leading the business has a revenue backlog. We've got a service optimization backlog. To be clear, when I say service optimization, I'm talking about business processes changing. So we're applying this technique not just to IT delivery, but to the way that the business is operating on a day-to-day basis, and that's the service optimization lens. Then lastly, the technical lens is looking at technical enablers, tech debt that's occurring, and any scale-based enablers. So we can get a product out there, but can 2 million people use it or not? And then interestingly, I've got this really odd backlog over here with the coach. Now over time that will actually move to delivery. But the reason why I have it here is that I've really found that over time, when I go into an area, people's capability comes last. I go in and say, we really need to improve TDD or BDD, or we need to uplift the quality that we're getting out of our retrospectives. And all of those things actually takes time. But we're too busy to work smarter, Renee. That's what they say. We're too busy to work smarter. And that's part of the problem is because these people are doing backlog grooming without me. And so as soon as I put my own backlog into that process and said, as a collective, we actually need to make a combined backlog. It didn't happen until then. So this is a great technique to start to shift some of the capabilities and make capability change just as valuable as all the rest of the other work. Because without working smarter, we're not going to get there. And so as a leadership cell, whilst the teams were delivering in their iterations, many teams delivering in the same heartbeat across a similar release, we as a leadership cell would do this thing called a meta iteration or a meta sprint, where generally the way it's worked for me is around about 6 weeks. So 3 iterations. Every 6 weeks as a leadership cell, we would get together and we would do our own version of Scrum. We would do backlog prioritization so that it would go into the teams underneath us. We would also do our own retrospectives, our own grooming, our own stand-ups. But many of those ceremonies also concluded the team members themselves. So this concept of a 2-step process is also quite a very common pattern. And you commonly see this in something like SAFe as it does what's called a program increment through 6 iterations. So why would you have a leadership cell? Well, it gives a mechanism to have equal authority against those roles. It gives you a mechanism to regularly groom as a collective and to think about things that you're commonly not considering as high as in importance. Often I see in a lot of organisations that don't implement a leadership cell, the product owner rules the show and everything is lost in the waste. Technical debt grows, customer experience diminishes. We need to make this everyone a product owner situation. So the third pattern I'm going to talk about is enterprise lean startup. It's all great and good to have a 10-person organisation as a startup, but what the hell does an enterprise lean startup mean? What does it even look like? So whilst this is normal lean startup, I sort of found that it wasn't quite right when I went into a bank. It wasn't completely correct. And this is what I actually saw happening as a pattern. So we would first develop a minimal viable product. Now, in fairness, people who are familiar with the term minimal viable product probably don't actually know the real definition. It's such an abused term. So what minimal viable product means is the smallest amount of work that you can get out there to a real customer to start learning from. The smallest thing out there. And then the whole point of doing that, is there even a market for this? So what interestingly I found is you don't actually go out and market it at that point in time, just to be clear. That's not the time to do it. So what you need to do, especially if your reputational risk exists, like if you're a bank, you don't want to put your name out there on a product, for example, that you put this minimal viable product out there to 10 customers, 10 safe customers, maybe even 100. Try internal customers yourselves first. Then you do a minimal experience increment. Because the minimal viable product probably doesn't have the full experience that a customer actually wants. Then you do a minimal return of investment. So now that we know that we're meeting our customers' needs, how are we going to make money off this product? Then you do a scalable increment. Now that we know that we're meeting customers' needs and we're going to make money, how can we bring this out to 2 million people? So one of the products that I sent out in one of these banks, in the space of 2 weeks, went to 2 million people. And we marketed it. Now, I want to highlight how important some of this is. Same bank, by the way, I wasn't there anymore, did a brand new product. I think they called it Kids Start or Kids Savings. I'm not quite sure what it was. So I still have a bank account there, and I opened a bank account for my daughter. And as we downloaded this new kid-based app and opened it up, and it had her balance in it. And then we noticed some features in there around doing jobs. And so she was able to write the jobs in there, and she was able to tick them off, and that was it. It was a bit of an odd experience. In Australia, we've got this concept called pocket money. I understand the interpretation is, I'm going to get this right, uang jajang. It's the best interpretation. But in essence, if a child does a job and they're expected to do the job, they'll earn a small amount of money, 50 cents. I don't know what the equivalent of that is. It's a small amount of money. So what I really wanted as an experience, because it wasn't just my daughter's experience, it was my experience in using the app as well. I have the adult version of the app. I wanted to see her account in my app. I couldn't. That was a bummer. I wanted to be able to give her jobs. I wanted to allocate money to those jobs. I wanted her to tick off that she's done those jobs. I wanted me to say, yes, I've seen that you've done those jobs. And as soon as that happens, I want the money to go into her account. That's what I wanted as an experience. Do you think that was in the product? No. And that was the answer. I have a friend who's still in there. Well, we might do that down the line. I'm not going to use that product anymore. It didn't meet my minimal expectations. I'm not going to go back to it. And so you have to be really careful with this. Learn, certainly go out to production, but learn before you go out and market it. And so once you have an idea about those different elements, those minimal expectations, return of investment, scalable elements, you can do this. This is the Kano model. You can map it up to what is basic needs, what are delighters. You use different post-it notes for different colours of types of work that you have. And then you do this, overlay. Which of these is a minimal viable product? You sort of wiggle a line through here. It's not exactly as straight as it represented here. Which is the minimal experience increment. And basically you're building your backlog top to bottom just using this really simple technique. And that's how we've been doing it. All right, so pattern 4. Remove handoffs and dependencies. This is probably the pattern that I'm the most passionate about. I'm severely passionate about. So commonly inside of teams, what you've got is this idea that you've got a group of people who are working like a sprint or multiple in advance of the team. They're doing design work in advance of the team. The product owner and the designer are there. And maybe if they're lucky, the developer gets a say in that as well. And this is what it sort of looks like as what's called dual track Scrum, right? Always one sprint in advance. And then there's some testing that's happening a sprint after the development's been done. And you ask teams, how fast are you? Oh, we're great. We're delivering in a sprint. And I look at this and I go, actually, you're developing in 3 sprints. This is your cycle time, 3 sprints. It's this misnomer that we're awesome. And what I'd actually say is, don't have 3 sprints. If it's going to be 6 weeks, make your sprint length 6 weeks. Do it end to end in whatever time it is. So this misnomer that all sprints have to be 2 weeks or less, I actually think maybe we should be extending them more. And so at scale, it gets more hideous. Instead of it being a dual track Scrum, it is 6 track safe. And I've seen this time and time again, and it kills me. So we have, at any point in time, a team could be focusing on all of these elements. They could be focusing on, I've just released, I'm doing some support work. I could be also doing analysis for the next sprint. I could be doing development for the current sprint. I'm doing the increment planning for the next product increment, which is 6 weeks away. I'm shaping things that are even bigger coming down the pipeline as well. And then I've got, all that learning stuff that I'm meant to be doing and the meetings that my manager sends me to. This is crazy. Context switching is causing the team to be barely productive at all. And the example that I gave yesterday, if you didn't hear it, I have lots of teams that are really awesome, and I look at their cycle time, 6 days. That's a pretty awesome cycle time, right? Concept to cash, 223 days. It's a bit different, isn't it? What is happening? Well, there's a lot of context switching that's happening that's causing this. So reduce batching is probably my strongest tip that I can actually give. Reduce it down to only 1 or 2 context switches. Do this by finishing a large piece of work as a team. Then as a team, go upstream and do discovery. Break the work down. Work out what the design is as a team. Then deliver it. Support it. Then go on to the next piece of work. So stop working across multiple things at once. Pattern number 5, design and Agile. Because we don't have any Agile frameworks that have design in it, we're all learning right now how to integrate those 2 concepts together. And this is the common way it's being integrated. It's very similar to the handoff slides that I just showed you. But in essence, you've got a developer and quality assurance and Scrum Master, and they're working on the current sprint. And they're producing their software. And somewhere in the middle between them is the product owner and the business analyst, and they're looking at analytics and reporting and looking at stories as it's going on both sides of the fence. And then you've got a whole pile of people who are working on the next iteration or the next increment. So customer testing, UX specialists, visual designers. And the crazy thing that I see is that this group of people on the right don't even sit anywhere near this group of people on the left. Never on the same floor. And they're just doing all this magical thinking without ever talking to developers. It's really awesome for them, I'm sure. Probably not for the developer. Yeah. So, what I've actually seen work best is obviously get them into the team. It's not that hard. I do still see the value of a UX specialist and a customer testing lab being outside of the team, being almost like a service that the team is pulling on. But have your visual designer with the team. And importantly, don't see it as, oh, my job is to do empathy mapping and customer journey mapping and wireframes. Your job as a team is all of these things, not the one person's and my role job. All right. Now, this one's tricky. I'm not going to get through all the detail of this one because it's quite a complex one, but it's talking about economic-based teams. If you're familiar with any of Kenny Rubin's work, he covers it really well, but it has sort of moved on in time as well. So feature teams, I'm going to tell you some language about what different types of teams are, and you can then actually label your own teams and know what the type of team is. And importantly, you can know what the pros and the cons are. There is no great answer here. There are pros and cons to any construct associated with teaming. So feature teams, the example is, I know if I want to know my recurring payment will overdraw. And so as a banking customer, I want to know if a recurring payment will overdraw my account so that I can manage my accounts and not get an overdrawn fee. That's the story that we're going to go through as a scenario. And so in this example where you've got a feature team, the whole team is able to deliver that feature without going outside the bounds of that team. Okay? So the pros, well, there's no dependencies. There's no handoffs, which means it should be a really fast cycle time as a result of that. There should be little integration because you've got everyone in the team that you need to have in order to do it. Unfortunately, the cons is that you probably need to have more cross-functional capabilities inside of the team, and that takes some time to grow. So in the example that I provided earlier in the situation where I went from 2 teams to 16 teams, what I missed out was the fact that one of those teams was an iOS team and one of them was an Android team. And so one of the first things that I did was said, no, we need to actually have an iOS and Android person in the same team. And there was a lot of kerfuffle, but they did it and it worked. What they did was this. They were architectural teams, okay? A lot of people don't know that that's the term for this. So if I want to do this particular feature, it has to go through to 3 different teams to get done. And the consequence of this is naturally lots of dependencies. It requires integration. But if you're in that situation where you've got lots of contractual agreements, I was talking to someone earlier today where they were talking about the fact that they're cut as architectural teams because of distribution. Well, that's the situation that you're in. Just be aware of the pros and the cons associated with it. So component teams, often misunderstood as feature teams, which they're not. But in this example, where we've got this feature, it's actually going to be going to 2 different teams. So it needs to go to the payment team so they'll actually work out if it's going to overdraw or not. And then it needs to go to the notifications team so I can let them know from a customer perspective that they're going to be overdrawn. This is what Spotify does. Okay, they're component teams. Very small parts of screens can be broken down into component teams, and that's effectively what Spotify has done. What's great about this is that you have really strong ownership of that particular part of the system. I do feel it has the risk of really high levels of dependencies though, if you've got a really big feature that needs to be built. If it goes across multiple of these and requires integration again. And so this is the new child in the group, which is customer journey teams. And in fact, there's 2 different patterns here. I haven't represented the second one. So one pattern whereby you own part of the customer journey. Pattern number 2 being you own an experience that goes end to end across a customer journey. So either of those patterns. And so the benefit associated with this, other than the fact that it's going potentially across, again, multiple capabilities from multiple systems, is that it should really reduce some of those dependencies down, because rarely do features end up going through multiple parts of customer journeys. So low cycle times. If you're after a really good example, think Lloyd's has a really good white paper on how they've done customer journey teams that you can see. So on to pattern 7. If you missed my presentation yesterday on managing impediments, then you missed 45 minutes of awesomeness that covers this pattern entirely. Oh well, just have to watch the video. But in essence, have a mechanism to go all the way from the teams to the CEO or to the board of your organisation in the space of a few days with any issues or things that are slowing you down, and improve on reducing those things that are slowing you down. And my last pattern is don't follow one of the scaled frameworks. Find your own way. It's so different. I mean, you experience, you learn, you test, you experiment, find out what works for you. I mean, you can use them if you need some ideas. And to be clear, whilst I'm bashing an awful lot on Scrum, there's some great things about Scrum that I like. I like the fact that it easily combines things like SAFe. SAFe combines Scrum and Kanban and lean thinking. It gives some good management coverage of things as well. I just don't like its batching. It's got really heavy batching. And I haven't seen a company move off it, and I haven't seen a company improve its cycle time to customers through using it. Right, so finally, any questions?
What homegrown solution have you seen that was surprisingly good?
So the question was, what homegrown solution have I seen that was surprisingly good? Interestingly, one of the organisations did really basic Scrumban, where it was both Scrum and Kanban based focused, flow focused. Day one, a whole pile of coaches landed together, and it was made clear to us, we're just going to follow these steps. And these steps were shown to us on a butcher's paper with around about 20 post-it notes. And we all discussed it, and we were all happy to give it a go and continue to adapt it. And that process evolved over time and ended up being on a huge board, which we called a learning board. And then we worked out how to do discovery as well. So we ended up how to combine design thinking into it. So I think the thing that I liked the most about it was that we started really simple and continued to evolve it as we actually test and learnt what worked. So I talked earlier about the value of having a visual designer with the developers. My highest performing team ever was a team that had 2 developers, sitting in between them was one visual designer. There was a Scrum Master who was also part an architect, part a BA, and one quality assurance tester. And those guys were as fast as all of the teams that were around about double their size.
So, to return, if an organization is doing a digital transformation and choosing Agile as a method, and usually it's focusing on the delivery teams. And how about the non-delivery teams? Like maybe even in IT, we have IT risks, IT process, IT vendor management, like the non-delivery teams.
Yeah. So in my experience, you'd want to try and integrate those people into the tribe as much as possible. So when I talked a little bit earlier about this picture here, for example, as risk, I would have risk always incorporated in the steering stand-up at this level here. It depends on a particular piece of work as well. So if it was a high-risk element, there was an awful lot of activities, then they may be in a particular Scrum team themselves. Governance is again that situation where you'd have them at that steering level, so they're more of a partner. What I haven't displayed here is there's this concept that I have around a shaping team and what that shaping team comprises of. And in addition, this concept around an extended team, and like PMO could end up being in that extended team. So there's a number of support people that do end up running in parallel to these series of teams, but I can't show that slide to you. All right, well, thank you, everybody. If you want to talk to me, I'll be here afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for Renee for our closing keynote speaker. And now, good afternoon, everyone. How are you feeling now after these 2 days of conference? Overwhelmed? Okay.